Hello, I am Jacqueline Eckern, and I'd like to welcome you to the Addiction Hope inaugural online conference. Today, we are delighted to have Dr. Patrick Carnes speaking. I know you'll enjoy this presentation. A little bit about Dr. Carnes for you. Dr. Carnes is the founder of the International Association for Trauma and Addiction Professionals and Gentle Path Press. He has more than 30 years of experience in the field of sexual addiction treatment, and he is an internationally recognized expert, presenter, and interview subject. His achievements include the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health, where they now award an annual Carnes Award to researchers and clinicians who have made exceptional contributions to the field of sexual health. In your right-hand side of the panel, you will find many links to different resources about Dr. Carnes, including IITAP, the organization he founded, his book, and Gentle Path by the Meadows Gentle Path, which is a program he is involved with. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carnes.
Well, I welcome you to my house because that's where I'm sitting. I want you to know that I've learned when you start a speech, you kind of got to start with where you are personally, what you're conscious of. And one of the things that I'm conscious of is that I slipped on some ice and I sprained my ankle. So I'm not going to, I'm tethered to this chair, which is probably a good thing. And if you see me a little shifting and uncomfortable, it's simply I'm just moving my foot so that I can do this thing. Other than that, I'm pain-free. I'm not hurting anything. I don't want you to worry about me. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to do this with you. I want to start and have you think about what's happening in our culture right now. There is so much that we are having to confront. And we need to look at some principles that, because it's important in understanding sex addiction and addiction in general. This is the major crisis of our time, is addiction. And in order to understand that, I got to go back in history a little bit. This painting that you see is a painting that was done of Dr. Pinel, who during the French Revolution, and what it depicts is that in the spirit of the revolution, that all citizens, everyone had dignity, that in the insane asylum, he is taking the shackles off the inmates. The idea being is that even if they are deemed crazy and what have you, it's sort of one of the real landmarks of in medicine, where mental health was seen as something that was a real health issue and that people deserve to be treated with respect. Very important painting because the dignity of the patient and that it's a real medical problem is something that is part of the struggle that we as a culture have at the moment. And this is a painting about 20 years later actually in England. And it is also of another insane asylum. And in it, you see members of the court, because the royal court on Sunday afternoons would go to the insane asylum to look at the inmates for amusement, how crazy they are, how weird they were, how odd they are, or whatever. But they were seen as objects of not pity or not respect, no compassion in this. This is that they're amusing. And my experience in this is that I wonder if you take the two approaches, if we don't have both going on now. Every now and then in the grocery store, I bet you do this too, there's a section by the cash register that has all the various Inquirer and the latest scandals, what have you, and you'll take and you don't want anybody to see you buying one, but you kind of really quickly try to read to see what's in there. That's kind of what I do anyway sometimes. But in the media, have we really changed? In other words, we look at people who are in the news, some of our greatest, most talented people. And the question that gets asked is why is it this woman is so talented, has one of the greatest voices in the world, and has been through rehab 5 times, and she's drinking again, or she died, or she whatever. And it is part of the media amusement about how sick or crazy they are. And so what is this much different than the insane asylum to see how weird people are and the scandals of people, some of our people of greatest achievement. And this becomes very important because even scandals right now, we have scandals, one with Johns Hopkins University, where it's a $190 million lawsuit. There's the scandal recently about the sports doctor that treated gymnasts and all the damage that he did and what have you. And the reality is, and the recent harassment issues that have appeared in the news, there's a couple lessons to take away from this. First, when somebody goes to rehab and they're famous and they relapse, I'll tell you how that happens. When somebody has a real problem and it's treatable and they can recover from that, they need time. And they have work to do. It's a 2 to 5 year process. And the immediately post-treatment, 30 days doesn't fix it, 45 days, 60 days, it's not going to fix it. They do need to have time away. And when they return, they have an instruction sheet. There's a whole plan laid out of things that they need to do, but they have handlers. And what the handlers say, because what people of great achievement, they love their talent. They want to be at their very best. And what their handlers say, those psychologists, nice people, but they have no realistic business sense. If you do not go on that band tour this summer, you are going to be a has-been by the fall. If you don't get back in the boardroom and take over this corporation, somebody else is going to take it from you. In other words, the handlers put it in such as that it hit them in the spot where they really live, which is what they are good at, whether they're an inventor in a business, a politician, or what have you. But the fact is, you need time to do the things that can help you with the mental health problem that you have. And so in many ways, one of the things that we know, Nasser Ghanayami's book, he talks about in mental health, some of our greatest people. Lincoln was bipolar. Edison. Winston Churchill was drunk during World War II most of the time. You have Kennedy, Martin Luther King, their drug use, their activities, what have you, that were way out of control. Some of our most talented people. In fact, one of the jokes that he makes is that if you're in a real crisis, you really don't want a mentally healthy president. You want, and because what happens when you have a mental health issue, there are certain lessons that you come away with that in leadership can make a difference. I know for sure that one of the things, and we'll talk about this more in this session, is that the reality is that one of the biggest struggles that you have, I can take people of great talent, and our staff, the Meadows, do this all the time, is that if they can get healthy, they can go to a new level of achievement. They can take their talent in a way that they've never been able to do, if they're allowed to really do the things that they need to fix things. So the first problem is there's kind of an anti-treatment, anti-mental health, insane asylum, spectacle kind of a part of what goes on in the culture. Going back to the most recent wave of things about sexual harassment. I have a colleague who, they've made great progress in Canada in terms of teaching people about, and I'll tell you more about this, about addiction. And one of the things that she says, that she's really smart about it, and they spent a lot of money to find this out. Every time you team up sex addiction with an issue like sexual harassment or the abuse of children or trafficking or any of the many ways, the things that are causes. The truth is we are making a major revolution right now in our sexuality, which is a good thing. That needs to be cleaned out and what have you. But I can tell you one thing about people, many of the people who do sexual harassment at the level that is in the news at this point in time, that there is a whole ideology there that is not about sex addiction. And the problem for the treatment centers, if somebody is supposed to be in a treatment center can't explain to the public. We have very strict rules what we can say. You know, they may or may not be there. Most treatment centers are integrity. They will not take somebody that is untreatable or that they're not equipped to treat, get them to a place that they are equipped to treat. And then, you know, but the media circus that follows, and if they think they're out of place, and that person isn't even in the place, it's really kind of a circus in a way. And it's the insane asylum, look at the weird people. And in fact, the other part to consider, when it comes to sex offenses, there are some people that the mechanisms that lead to offending actually have some different pieces to them that are very different from sex addiction. There's some that overlap occasionally, and that we can do a lot with. But the reality is that there's some people we don't have a technology to reach. And so the fact of the matter is, when you have sexual harassment, that's what sex addicts act. They are sexual harassers, or they abuse children, or what have you. And my talk today is to say that isn't what sex addiction is about. It's a very different set of ways of looking at it. And this is an experiment for me, and I want to try this because what I want to tell you is, first of all, we are in this huge change sexually. You think of things that we have gotten comfortable in talking about sexually in the last 10 years. You have to think about this. Transgender, marriage between same-sex couples. I mean, the list goes on and on and on about all the things that we are now talking about and developing kind of understandings and protective systems and looking at prejudice. This particular painting I love. It's the story of Joachim and Anna. You know it from the Bible, but it was, I think, done by Giotto during the Renaissance. So it's a great painting because if you remember the story, they were a barren couple. And in that time, if you were barren, it was seen as a sign that God was punishing you for something. And Joachim felt that somehow God was punishing him, and in order to expiate for his whatever sin, he went out into the desert. And finally, an angel appeared to him and said, this isn't your fault. This is my paraphrase. Go home to Anna. She's the woman you love. Enjoy your wife. And after many years in the desert, she returns. And this is a picture of them as an older couple. And the love and the touching and the care between them. What's significant is that they are sexual and bonded, and it's not about reproduction. In other words, a major shift occurred when you don't tie sexual behavior that it's only about reproduction. That was a major shift in human sexuality. And now we are piling up in this day and time many of those kinds of changes. And they're happening quickly, and they're happening all at once. So is the public confused? Absolutely. But I have a way of thinking about this so that you can start to understand what sex addiction is about and understand where the hopefulness is, because I believe, honest to God, that we're at a point, it is the sex addicts that are going to bring us to a point of realizing in this culture that our number one public health problem is addiction, which is how that fits in the series that you're listening to today. And I want to, it ties that together if you really understand that. So I'm going to beg your forgiveness, because I have many more. I'm going to pick and choose, because I want to tell you this story to see if I can convey to you better what sex addiction is about for people. Because one of the things I want to tell you is addiction has now extended into our children. And one of the ways that this is an innocent picture, I mean, all of us knows how it works. Kids are better at computers and iPads. I had my 4-year-old grandson, I was having trouble with my iPhone. He says, "Here, Grandpa, let me fix that for you." And he grabs it, and in seconds he has it done. And I couldn't do it. I'm sitting here at 70 something, and I couldn't fix my own phone, but my 4-year-old could fix it for me. The reality is that comfort they have with digitalization is extremely important. And in fact, our whole culture is becoming digitalized. And one of the things, and we could spend the whole hour talking about this, but there are people who specialize in how to build addictive products, and that's what they do. And one of the very best people at that is the gaming community and the pornography community, in that you can hook. And I want to talk to you about how that happens. So let's start off, if we think about children and kind of what it's doing to our culture. One of the things in what we call the Certified Sex Addiction Therapist community that IITAP trains people to work with sex addiction is, this really caught our attention, was a study of children who were asked, 68 children who were asked to be able to go a whole 8 hours without using an iPad or an iPhone or anything. And out of the 68, only 3 of those kids were able to make it through the whole day. And so the point of it is that we are in a period of where the comfort with digitalization is really changing how our children are thinking about this. And this becomes very important, as you shall see, because one of the other things that we are seeing is that this was the first major study, but has been repeated in numbers of different places. But one of the things that we know is in this particular study, it talked about that two-thirds of our adolescents between 12 and 16 are being actively sexual digitally in a variety of forms and with each other in ways that we never experienced as when we were growing up. And I'm talking really anybody in their 30s, 40s, 50s really didn't quite experience the way the kids are experiencing it now. And what the study didn't do, and subsequent studies did do, is to show that less than 12% of parents have any idea how sexually active the children are. The other thing that you need to carry away is that David Finkelhor, who is the driving force behind this article and one of the pioneer researchers in sexual abuse, he said 34% of them are going on to have a lifetime problem with this. Now, this is really significant because if you think about it, 34%, now the ages between 12 and 16 in addiction medicine, what we know is that whenever you overdo or experiment, it's a high risk. Like if you smoke 13 or 14, you get drunk when you're 13 or 14, you get your parents' credit cards and you go online, start gambling. That if you start doing those things, the chances of go up dramatically of having a major problem as an adult with that issue. There is an incredible amount of data about the vulnerability of the teenage brain at the age of 13. Now, the reason that becomes significant is that it changes, in fact, it changes the brain in terms of how the brain operates. And so we know, for example, that the brain has a pleasure centers that there's a whole cycle the brain goes through. And the thing about sex and food is they're both hardwired. I mean, you don't have to drink, you don't have to gamble. But sex and food are very much part of it. That they can become addictive is scary, but the reality is, as this patient drawing talks, is that it becomes a monster quickly, and it takes over that person's life. And so what we know is that in the ages 12 to 16. That number of kids who are into that is about 6 million. About 6 million kids in our culture. Every hour, 600 kids see their first sexual scene or experience on the internet. Every hour. 200 of them are going to go on to have a lifetime problem. 85 of them start before the age of 10. I did a survey last year of our patients, who many of them are in their 40s and 50s, but we asked, when did you start? And over half of the patient population, people in their 30s on the internet, they started at the age of 7. The age discovering their father's pornography collection, discovering something on the internet, and then they were off and running. Now, why is that important? Because the reality is that what happens in the brain is, going back to the gaming thing. See, what gaming teaches you is the brain is looking for ways to organize data. And when it organizes the data, one of the experience of gaming is gaming teaches you want to be number one. You want to have the highest score of the day. You want to beat the game. You want to beat the simulation. If you ever watch the movie Ender's Game, or you read any of the gaming novels like Armada or Player One. There's a whole culture about this story, about what happens. And you get caught up in the gaming into such an extent that it becomes your life cause. And so if once that game and you've conquered it, you go on to the next one and the next, and it's about novelty and challenge. Really important that you get that, is that the brain always looks for challenge, always wants to be at its best. And so there is this competition that occurs. And so you have a learning system, which is, this is the deal, is I got to keep winning. I got to look for the next most challenge, or the most weirdest, or the most bells and whistles, what have you. And that's the learning system that the brain incorporates very early. And it's changing our children's brains. The level of digitalization that's going on, and I have been a Fulbright scholar this year, which is part of the story. And the first question that docs ask me is, are we in an epigenetic crisis? And basically what they mean is, we are seeing that the brains of children are being changed by this. And is it going to be something that we will be and there are many who are saying this, we will be the first generation in which you will see evolutionary change within one generation. So let's go back to this concept, you will, of what happens to the brain. What happens in the brain is that let's take 4 hours of pornography a week. We now have studies, European studies. University of Berlin had one in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Valerie Voon at Cambridge has done this, 7 studies. NIMH in the United States is now funding studies, and are finding this, is that what happens with pornography is that it is a super stimulus. And when I hear people talk about it, they talk about how fast it happens, which is what my crystal meth patients talk about. It's very quick, happens very quickly. And it's about the overstimulation that occurs. Now, a little about me. I have been married. I have been divorced. I have been widowed. I am remarried to another widow now. And one of the things I can truthfully tell you is one of my life learnings is that what working out a successful long-term sexual relationship is a life achievement. And handling one woman is a full-time deal, because there is so much to attend to in the one-to-one person. And historically, that's how we evolved. Even if it was, you did it serially and you had more than one woman in your life, it still became where that courtship process was a full-time process. And that's how we evolved. And what people talk about is we have left the Holocene period of human development, where we evolve under certain conditions. And today we are in what they call the Anthropocene, where basically it's the human created environment that's changing things. And in this human created environment, we are not responding well to the overstimulation that we're getting. So the brain, if we are built for courtship, of working it out and working so that you can gain the trust and have sex with someone, takes time. Now you can look at a screen and you can see 50 women of all ages, in all kinds of circumstances. You can be having conversations with 5, 6 women, and you can be involved with multiple women all at the same time. And the stimulation becomes very, very high. That supernormal is, for some people, it is like crystal meth, in that it happens so quickly that they get caught up into it. And what happens in the brain is that 4 hours of pornography a week and up, the brain starts to conserve and focus on the pleasure center. The pleasure center process that goes on in the brain. And what they start to see is people who do this all the time, that the brain actually starts to change. And this is true of all addictions, but it happens very fast in porn addiction. The gray matter shrinks of the brain, the frontal lobes that makes the next right decision starts making bad decisions. And we use the concept of saliency. What that means is that the reward center is so protected by the brain is that it actually distorts reality. And so that person then starts doing this thing many times, which they really hate actually, but they want it even though they hate it, which is one of the signs of addiction, is they hate what they're doing, but they can't stop what they're doing. So the brain actually, it also affects the striatum, which is memory. It's about learning. It's about management of feelings. It's about all of those, all those things that we use for our emotional compass. And as you will probably know, is that your brain is also in your heart as well as in your head. There are neurons in your heart. So like if a decision comes from your heart, it knows right away. That's the brain part that's in your heart. The deliberate part, the part in what you do a lot of thinking about and what have you, is in your head. But the brain is distributed in this whole section, sort of the sinus rhythm kind of section between where your brain works, how you breathe, how your heart works. It's an all integrated process. So the point of it is that this process, when it gets off keel and you're 15 and you are spending and doing 20, 30 hours of pornography a week, and you can't get to class by the time you're getting out, you can't finish your papers. Your parents are concerned. They take the kid to a doctor diagnoses ADHD, can't keep focus, what have you. I have a colleague who's Fulbright scholar, and it is where his focus is. And when we first met, he said, what I'm finding is the diagnosis of ADHD is often about, and I completed the sentence, it's about porn. He said, that's right. And I said, because by the time they're 15, and then what they do is they add in other chemicals, prescription drugs. They add in alcohol, they add in other stuff. So by the time they are 19 or 20, you have got a kid, classically we describe failure to thrive. So when we talk about what sex addicts do these people harass people? Do these people, are they abusing children? Are they exploiters? No, these are your children and they're in trouble. Only you don't know it. That's the problem here. And so the thing that is instrumental to know is that one of the things that goes with this, for example, is, and I'm going to cover a lot very quickly because I'm going to run out of time and I don't want to get the hook at the end here. There are real issues that occur. So for example, one of the things that happens is that one of the corollaries with supernormal stimulation, the ability to have an erection, erectile dysfunction becomes a real serious problem. So that you got a normal teenage boy who falls in love with a girl, and when it comes to the point of having your first sexual count, it doesn't work. It's not enough stimulation. You can go home and you can masturbate to porn, but you with a real person cannot do it. And that extends into adulthood. It's one of the major corollary sexual health problems that goes with what we call the supernormal stimulus, is that a normal relationship between people, you can't have it. So the point that I'm making is that, and it's also, there's a number of studies. This is one that came from the University of North Carolina, but there's some others that are coming up pretty much with the same conclusion. About 10% of college students are struggling sexually with all of these problems, both men and women. It's not about a male disease, or it's both. And the reality is, you think of 1 in 10 college students is struggling with a problem. That's a big issue that we are not looking at. And so I think what's important is to go back to what we know. And one of the things that happened over the 90s and first decade of this millennium is that our knowledge of how the brain becomes addicted has grown. And that there is a definition of an addiction as a brain disease. It's not a social problem, it's not a moral problem, or a criminal problem. It is a brain problem whose behaviors manifest in all these areas. So let me give you an example. If we were to talk about Alzheimer's, for example. In Alzheimer's, what are the signs of Alzheimer's? First of all, losing context with the reality that is around you. The denial about limitations. The inability to regulate your own feelings, and so these emotional outbursts and become difficult to manage. Everybody understands that about Alzheimer's. Yeah, brain problem, got that. That's also true of addicts. Addicts have trouble with reality, and the distortion that occurs in the brain makes a very bad idea look good. They have denial about what their limitations are or what they could be doing. They can't stop themselves. They have a tremendous problem with their own internal upsetness and how to regulate those feelings, which is hard enough to do with as an adolescent. So what I'm trying to say is, what the way that we've come to understand this in addiction medicine is that that addiction is a brain disease, which it can draw from alcohol, sex, food, what have you, grab from all of those things. And so one of the things that the American Society of Addiction Medicine has done is they have the ASAM, as it is called, is the society that certifies, like somebody gets certified to be an emergency room doctor or an endocrinologist or what have you. This is the society that teaches doctors about addiction. And if you go into the ASAM website, they will talk to you about that the definition of what has happened is that the brain reward circuitry has been totally altered, and that it can be altered by foods, substances, behaviors, and so anyone who has an addiction is vulnerable to food and sex addiction. So how does that work? I mean, one of the chemicals, for example, is dopamine, is an important part of feeling good in your life. The midbrain needs to get dopamine to regulate yourself. It is sort of the joy juice. There's a little gland at the bottom of your brain called the corpus callosum. It makes oxytocin. Oxytocin is the joy juice. It sends it up to the frontal lobes. It helps you make good decisions, helps you manage your feelings. It's a very important process. If dopamine does not get there, then you're going to have a problem in the brain's reward center. Here's a contrast between an alcoholic, a cocaine addict, and an obese person. And a normal person. This is what a normal person looks at. The red is that the dopamine's getting there. Food will raise dopamine about, can raise it about 100%. Sex can raise it about 100%. But this is a very important part of our story as we go along. Amphetamines will raise as a super stimulating drug. It rewires the brain. You cannot be a recreational because it raises the dopamine level 1100%, and it is so powerful. And the brain recognizes this is important. And that's why it starts cannibalizing from the gray matter and what have you, and starts to distort all of these things. But the fact of the matter is it's that supernormal stimulation that occurs on the internet that really is the problem. So we know about the erectile dysfunction. We know that there's a lot of supernormal stimulus. The Coolidge effect is something, it's a phrase that talks about that there's this dopamine surging process that goes on in the brain that makes it all very different. So this is the ASAM definition of addiction. Addiction is a primary chronic disease with brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Anybody can look up on the web and see what addiction is. Now, why is that important to us today? Because our number one problem, number one public health problem is addiction. Because of what substance abuse does, $559 billion a year. If you consider what compulsive overeating does, obesity, 30% of our adults are obese. 30% of our grade school children are now obese. And that brings issues, cardiovascular issues, diabetes issues, what have you, raises the cost of healthcare huge. Sex addiction has a variety of ways that it does this. We have one of the changes is that it used to be throat cancer. Tobacco, alcohol, go back and forth, which was the leader or cause of that. Now the leading cause of throat cancer, and it started when you were in your 50s. Now the leading cause of throat cancer is HPV, which is, as a virus, is passed when sex buddies in the 7th and 8th grade have oral sex with one another. And the result is that throat cancer is now appearing in the early 30s, and the major cause of it is that sexual behaviors that they see on the internet and then go and do. Not everybody does. And one of the important things to understand about why some do and some don't has a lot to do with DNA. About 25% of addiction is about DNA. And across addictions, there's about 30 constellations of DNA. And one of the things we are researching right now, I am in the midst of a study looking at the DNA, and we're finding that the DNA that is in gaming, because there's a big literature there, in gambling, compulsive overeating, cocaine use, alcohol use, that it's the same issue. So from a sex addiction adds dramatically. HIV is not, while it's not a leading cause right now, or what have you, HIV still is a very expensive illness and affecting us. And one of the things we know, for example, one of our largest providers of chemical dependency started looking at their admissions, and they found that 20%, both men and women, who were coming in for chemical dependency also had sex addiction that needed to be treated at a residential level. And in their relapse unit, it was 30% of both men and women. That means in our culture and in our system, 180,000 patients are going to be admitted this year, and they're for their chemical dependency, and no one will ask them about what they've been doing sexually. But your cocaine addicts, 50 to 70% of them are going to be actively involved with sex and cocaine at the same time. They do what we call addiction interaction. They become a package. And that package is such that you can't do one with the other. Nicotine and alcohol is another example. And the fact of the matter is that fusing of addictions is why we have so much, the relapse issues can be so high, is we're not looking at the total picture. So you got to ask about what the diagnostic criteria is. I mean, what do doctors use? It's the same addiction criteria that they use. Loss of control, you do it. You vow they're never going to do it again, and you do it. This guy just mounting up the money that he does, that he spends on it. Compulsive behavior, which means that you do it over and over again, the same kinds of things you hate doing and eat, but you keep on doing it. The efforts to stop, and our patients often they use the hammer as a symbol of the extreme levels that they would have. Noticed that pills, sex, alcohol, the internet, all part of the pictures here. And the agony of withdrawal, loss of time. This is really interesting because one of the things that we know about people of talent, and maybe you have even experienced getting it on the internet and finding out that suddenly 2 hours are gone and you didn't even notice it. When somebody is in their creative focus, a whole day can go by. I've done that in my writing. I have done that. I know what that's like. And in addicts, they talk about there's real time and there's addict time. And a guy by the name of Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book, what he originally called Flow, but it was about 180 studies that he did in human achievement. And this is very important to get. And what he said is, in human achievement, addicts use their brains the same way that people of great achievement do, which is why some of our best talent and why people who have got great abilities are so vulnerable to addiction. And so the reality is, I'll go in and I'll say to patients, I said, were you good addicts? And they go, oh yeah, I was great at it. And it's because of that challenge. And what Csikszentmihalyi said is that if you focus just on mindfulness and here and now and what have you, if you do not get them into their talent and help them get into work and being in a zone where they're doing things that matter to them and are good at and that they can improve in, they will never stay sober. And the treatment community have often missed that in our culture, is that you have to get at the talent. You have to get at the call, what they've been called to do. Because just focusing, and we use an example of in Vietnam, people were asked after the prisoner of war camps, how did you survive? Well, you had to do two things. You had to see how bad things were, but you also had to see, you have to have a vision that you live for. In 2005, I got a thing called valley fever. I almost died from it. And I remember walking out of the Mayo Clinic and I thinking of wasted time in my life. And I made a vow that I would not do anything, I would not put energy into things that were not important. Living that way, of where you are living into where you're trying to be into your excellence, is one of the goals of treatment that we can make success with. Now, preoccupation, thinking about it, a cocaine addict can look at a picture, a line of cocaine, and the brain will start to get high just from the picture. Now think of pornography, getting high from the picture. And inability to fulfill obligations, their lives start to fall apart. Here's a guy, kind of a classic, cocaine, sex addict. They'll go on 8 to 10 hour binges on cocaine and porn. And the thing is that they get to the point where they don't want to ejaculate and they can't. And so it becomes just an obsession. So there's a set of criteria that we use. Things escalate. You have the preoccupations, there's losses. Their life starts to just fall apart. Well, some time ago, I did a study which appeared in the Journal of Addiction Medicine, and this is one of the charts from it. Because one of the criticisms is there is no data on sex addiction. That simply isn't true. We have a journal dedicated for it that has been in existence for almost 30 some odd years, and we have many articles that, I mean, literally a lot of work that's been done. And I looked at this thing of the who else had worked on this criteria. There were many studies, and I just went through all the studies that had been done on the diagnostic criteria. And we all pretty much saw the same things. There was a lot of common agreement about the diagnostic criteria. We know that. We can see from brain studies the biomechanisms in the brain that are work, and that, so that a person who's a non-addict can look at a picture, for example, of porn, and they'll experience some arousal and you'll see a little bit of something. But a sex addict will look at it and it lights up just as if they were on cocaine or substance of some type. And and we can see this, we know this. Now, what's really important is by 2008, there was an article that appeared. It was pivotal. There were two pieces that occurred in the first decade. One was a Royal Academy lecture by a guy named Nestler, who talked about we have to deal with the natural addictions. And it was summarizing all this data from all these different aspects about how it's one disease and how it comes in packages. And it was followed up by an article by the lead author was Reddish, R-E-D-I-S-H, and it's called A Unified Framework for Addiction. 94-page medical article. Very rare to have an article that long in medicine. But what they did is they summarized all of the data about why addiction works the way it is, and that sex was part of that. And that there's 10 different portals and 7 different schools of thought, that if you put them all together, we had a whole picture of how the brain really becomes very, very connected to the, it's the same process. Now, why is that important to us? This is going to seem like a digression, but please hear me out on this. The Germans were great chemists, are great chemists. And in 1930 in Germany, the German people were depressed. Lots of reasons for that. Berlin was a sex destination for the whole planet. People flew to Berlin to have sex. The people were depressed. They had the economic depression was going on. They had reparations, all of that. And one of the things that was invented, like when Bayer put together aspirin, the same week he invented cocaine, which I always found ironical. But one of the things that was invented at the time was a thing called Pervitin that you could buy in any drugstore. And basically what Pervitin is crystal meth. And one of the things that crystal meth does is if you're depressed, depression goes away. Just magic. And people loved that. And then the other thing that happened is it lets you do work. You could work for days. You could go without sleep. Your energy was high and you felt empowered. Because basically you're on speed. In fact, by 1936, and Hitler was presented as a German that was different because he was a vegetarian. He didn't smoke. He was sort of the picture of health. But he was having cocaine and Pervitin and vitamins injected into his veins. By 1939, most of Germany was in fact on crystal meth. And what that meant is that when the war started and they invaded France, 3-1, British and French soldiers over Germans, superior technology. But the German soldier, being high on crystal meth, walked right over the British and the French armies. Guderian and Rommel, Hitler wanted them to stop, and they would not stop. They were high. They said, we're going to make it to the ocean. And Blitzkrieg was invented. And so the German soldier was supplied, airmen, submariners, everybody was on Pervitin. And so they made a superior soldier. And the thing about it that is important, that I want to make this point really clear so you understand, it also affected the brain so that there was mirror neurons were blocked, and the reality is compassion was gone, which is why you could live next to a concentration camp and be unmoved. Why you could go into a village and shoot 120,000 people and not see something wrong with that. And the reality is that Pervitin, there's a lot out about this, but it destroys empathy. And the thing that I'm wanting to suggest to you is that in our culture right now, we are a culture without losing our compassion. You think of what's happened in the last couple of years. Law enforcement shooting people. We can't seem to get a level of cooperation or partnership to get things through Congress. We have become a society which is not relating to one another, and our culture is at stake, and it's at a crisis. This particular chart is a very interesting study that we're doing right now. We have learned that there are certain higher order things that, higher order meaning like is above specific behaviors like compulsive affairs or exhibitionism or whatever. But there are certain things that transcend all that, sort of like mountain ranges with mountains in them. And that with that, there are certain mental health problems that occur that makes people do sexual behaviors that are problematic. So for example, Christian Grey in 50 Shades of Grey is right out of this chart. He's a post-traumatic stress disorder. He is, as a CEO, he has got all the signs he meets all the criteria, and he's also into S&M and exploitation. It all fits together. And so we are learning about this. The point is that we're coming to a whole new paradigm. And we have to think about it from the point of view of the brain. We know that it's a 3 to 5 year process, which is outlined in this slide in front of you. I know it's a lot to take in. But each phase has parts of things that the brain has to do in order to do. It's not something done in a few weeks. It is a process that takes time. It's very physical, and you can't take a pill for this. When Kurzweil was asked about all the medical innovations that are coming, that are going to be cancer, what have you, he says, the one thing we do not have a cure for that I see on the horizon is the time it takes to heal from addiction. And that's the part that our culture needs to learn. And we need to learn also that our sexuality is changing. We need to understand, what does that mean? Now, I play a clip, and I won't take the time to do it, but I look at intercultural conflict. And there is in Lord of the Rings this elven princess who falls in love with a dwarf, and they have this bond, and and he dies at the end. And she is so sad, and she says, why does it hurt so much? And the head of her clan says to her, because it was real. And that's what has to happen with sex. It has to be about what's real between people. And so if we start thinking about this new paradigm, in Canada, they took what the experts knew and what the public knew. And there's a huge difference between the two. And the experts knew that it was a brain disease, that it was a problem, that a variety of things contributed. For the public, it's a moral issue. They didn't try, maybe they had a bad upbringing. They educated people for 2 years, and everything in the province was geared for bringing people up to speed about addiction. When they were asked then about what did they need to have, the number one thing they asked for was help with sexual compulsive behaviors. It's important to see that the Canadians have laid a map out for us. And this whole thing is about putting dots together. This is out of Galileo hitting on sunspots. If you take all of his portfolio and you spin the book pages, you can see the sunspots move. That's what we're doing. We're in that place in science right now that the paradigm is changing about what goes into addiction. And sex addiction is our children, it's our wives, it's our husbands, it doesn't have to be about grotesque behavior, but it is common. And believe me, we have a tsunami coming with our children. So this is something that people need to get their arms around, that they need to understand, just as the people in Alberta did, to understand that they needed help to change their healthcare system so it was more responsive to the needs, what problems people were experiencing. Now, I know that I am at the point where I am supposed to allow questions, so I will take a couple questions at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Carnes. This is absolutely fascinating. So one question was, where is the top research being conducted now for sex addiction?
Well, it depends on what part of sex addiction you're talking about. It's being done in lots of places, lots of universities, and within the U.S. What we're I'll just tell you about what we're doing. I can tell you about that since I'm involved in it. I never dreamed I would be a Fulbright scholar, and I got nominated. I got nominated by the scientific community. I didn't think I would ever get it. I went through the interviews and I thought, and I've done this before. Ultimately, sex addiction is not like a popular topic. But what they said is that this is worth doing. And they were down the last 5 candidates. And I said, I'm going to get knocked out of the box. And they said, yes. And so what we are doing is a joint research project between Canada and the United States. There are 8 hospitals or intensive outpatient programs pulling together sex addicts and putting them into a pool by which and taking DNA samples so we can have a picture of the genomic structure. Now, the interesting thing is we have not only their sexual behavior, but we have also their personality inventories. So we have the psychopathology, if it exists, and we've learned amazing things already about this. But the fact that is really important that you come away with is that there is a cooperative effort between people in the United States, and there are people who are in businesses donating staff hours to gather data to make sure that the DNA lab at the University of Alberta, which is one of the best in the world, it's one of the best medical research complexes in the world, can help us make sense of at least that part of the problem. There are lots of studies going on now about kids. There are lots of studies going on about college. There are there's great work being done in various universities about what happens in the brain in terms of understanding that part. There's an epidemiological study coming out of Yale that is, I think, going to be probably that, and the DNA kind of just settles the issue. This is a matter of medicine. It's a biomedical matter. It's a brain disease, and we need to start coping with it.
Thank you. Another more basic question is, how do we talk to our youth about this from a coach's perspective to a parent's influence on this, on our kids?
Well, I have a daughter who is also works in the field, and we work together at the Meadows. And she's currently head of the IITAP training program for therapists. I watch her and I watch my son, who owns a computer company, is very aware. There's a set of things that parents need to understand. Like, for example, there is no privacy about computer use in the home. You don't have your own computer and a laptop in your bedroom. All homework is done at the kitchen table in front of everybody. You work together as a family, so that there is not the opportunity of something happening without a chance for a parent to talk about what it is that appeared on their screen. It's a whole different way. Sooner or later, they're going to see stuff, but the parents have to be aware that this is an issue. And what I see is that you also have to understand, it's the same thing as in alcoholism. You could have a genetic, it's about a 25% variable, but you can have the genes of alcoholism in your ancestry, and what it doesn't mean you're going to become an alcoholic. What it means is that in the right circumstances, you're going to become an alcoholic, but if you have the right attachment growing up and the right family stuff growing up and the right success in your life, you can really do well with it. If, however, you have a genetic structure that makes you vulnerable to addiction and you don't have those things, you become much more of a candidate then for having a real problem with it. And so that is perhaps one of our biggest tasks, because I see the United States as a model of, well, we have the most expensive medical system in the world. It's breaking our back economically, and we have one of the least healthy people of all the developed countries. When I go to Canada, I'm really struck. I don't see obese people. I do here. And what I think that it means is that we have this crisis, that we need to develop a national strategy for understanding addiction in general and the varieties of ways that it can appear. Countries in the Orient, for example, have had to go and do special legislation around gaming because gaming was interfering with work and people showing up. I mean, the cultures are going to have to cope with how addiction manifests in different ways in different cultures. But our problem is we are the ones who are exporting this idea of democracy and respect and the dignity of everybody. And we have to start with mental health is a real issue, and that it deserves good treatment. And it takes time and energy and expertise, but it can be worked with. The Albertan people, that whole experiment has shown that it is possible. We need to learn from that. This country has a lot that would be cleaned up if we started cleaning up our act in terms of just how addictive a culture we've become.
Dr. Carnes, thank you very much. This has been an absolutely fascinating presentation. Congratulations on becoming a Fulbright Scholar, sir.
Well, I thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was fun to do. It's kind of an interesting kind of a magic because I'm looking at this screen. I can't see anything. I'm talking into it. But obviously you can hear that I really believe that we have a problem. And I thank you because it is stuff like this that made the difference in Canada. And I think that what you're doing is a great thing and that people are fortunate to be able to have these opportunities to hear and learn. And I know the Meadows and IITAP, you can go IITAP.org, you can go Meadows.org, you can go to sexhelp.com, you can learn about this stuff. You can go to the ASAM website, American Society of Addiction Medicine. The resources are there for you to understand. In fact, the people who partly funded the Fulbright have a 30-hour brain course for any clinician that is free, that you can go, and you go Alberta Family Wellness, and you can sign up for this course, because we have to get our clinicians up to speed to understand the brain stuff. The resources are here. We just need to get them on the map so people can access them. And that's what you're helping with. So I thank you too.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Carnes. We'll make sure to follow up and publish the resources that you've mentioned on Addiction Hope too, so that folks can find those there. Thank you to the Meadows for helping sponsor this event, and we wish you the very best, Dr. Carnes.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie.
Bye-bye.